So just general house rules. If you're not speaking, try to be on mute. Otherwise, worst case, one of us will mute you. But as we kick things off, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're here for the Productivity Engineering Silicon Valley meetup. It hasn't happened in quite some time, so excited for a virtual version of it. Hoping that this will go back to maybe even a physical meetup sometime soon. But here with us today, we're here for a panel discussion on developer portals and platforms, kind of an area that's warming up across many companies, outside of companies, all over the place. In general, agenda, so me doing this really fancy, awesome welcome, passing the torch in a second to Pooja, but we'll have the panel discussion with a few awesome folks that Pooja will introduce in a moment. During that time, please do use the chat functionality in Zoom to ask questions, post questions, send clapping hands to feel engagement or whatever, whatever works for you. And throughout the panel, we will make stops here and there. So for another to kind of create a discussion with you that are attending, questions that you have and so forth for the speakers. And at the end of the session, I'll split everyone up into breakout rooms so we can kind of discuss, meet people, network, do what we used to do in real life before COVID. And I think that's pretty much it. In general, we'll also at the end, I'll show some kind of like next steps. If you want to join the Slack channel, if you want to join next meetups, anything like that, we'd love to have you all in our little group. Pooja, thank you so much for doing this. Off to you.
Thank you, Ron. Hello, everyone. I am Pooja Reddiwari, Senior Manager, Product Management, Platform Developer, Tools and Experiences at Salesforce. I'm going to be your moderator for the panel this evening. Joining me are four amazing speakers, our panelists. Before we go into introducing them, I just want to talk a little bit about the topic today and what we're going to be discussing. So DevOps has broken the barrier between development and operations. And some companies are looking at providing web-based interfaces for their CI/CD, while others are looking at it more holistically. As developers are embracing, as companies are embracing DevOps journey, it is definitely required for all developers to operate in the various phases of the DevOps lifecycle, starting from plan to code, build, deploy, test, release, monitor, and operate. So as they're trying to navigate through the different phases of the DevOps lifecycle, there are a wide variety of tools at their disposal to kind of leverage and also help them get through their day's work. Some companies, like I said, while they're looking at providing a UI on top of the CI/CD, there are other companies that are looking at it more holistically by providing one central platform or a portal for developers to come and get their job done. Not just that, they're also looking at providing all the information that any developer would need to kind of get their job done by going to that central place. And today we have an amazing panel joining me to discuss our most awaited topic, developer portals and platforms for internal engineering teams. Without any further ado, I'd love to welcome our panelists and all of you to join me. Let's do a quick round of introductions. I would ask our panel to introduce themselves and also throw in a fun fact. Let's start with Vasant Ashokan from Netflix.
Hey, Prod and JSP Meetup. My name is Vasant. I've been at Netflix for a little over 8 years, mostly working in the developer productivity space. And most recently, as of 6 months ago, started working on what Pooja referred to in terms of developer portals and platforms. Fun fact, that's a tough one. Maybe I'll share this. About 10 years ago, I think I decided to completely quit software engineering. I left in a hurry. I left back to India and said I'm not coming back and I'm not doing software anymore. Long story short, I did come back and I am back doing software again. Back to you, Pooja.
Thank you, Vasant. Vladimir, over to you.
Hi, everybody. This is Vladimir Bekvansky. I'm Distinguished Architect at PayPal. The areas of my work include developer experience, the architecture for all of the systems, but I'm also involved in architecture of systems in privacy and data space, did some work in the blockchain space. So a wide range of things in the company. A fun fact, I know that Pooja is about to ask me this question. So I asked my wife and son just 10 minutes ago, and they could not come up with anything. So here it is. But on the other side, as a teenager, I had a spider farm, and I experimented with impact of drugs on spider webs. A lot of cool stuff.
Thanks, Vladimir. Over to you, Austin.
Awesome. I don't know if I can top a spider farm, but I guess I'll try and follow that one. Hi everyone, my name's Austin. I have the honor of spending my day working with the Backstage open source community and trying to build an open source developer portal platform, and then spending the rest of my day trying to make Spotify engineers happy and build the best experience for them. In terms of a fun fact, I guess I was going to go a different direction, but now that he's introduced the concept of the farm, I will share that I'm actually on a farm right now. So since COVID, I have been living on a farm in Vermont. And so I'm coming to you powered by solar in a farm in the mountains in the middle of nowhere.
Awesome. Thanks, Austin. Over to you, Daniel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, my name is Daniel Hockman. I've been at Lyft for about 7 years, working predominantly on infrastructure on the back end. Did a lot of work on locations and geospatial indexing, actually. And that was the impetus for doing a bunch of other platform work at Lyft. You know, we introduced new databases as part of that. Okay, let's go and make a storage team to evangelize those technologies to other teams. So my whole career at Lyft has been about, you know, finding the gaps in our infrastructure, if you will, and then trying to solve that for myself and then bring that to other teams. And the team I'm currently on is called Platform Tools. And we're the creators of Clutch, which is an open source developer platform that we've been working on for about a year now. And fun fact, yeah, I'm really into my Vespa. And when I was in San Francisco, I was in like a Vespa club. And I've since moved to Austin. I haven't found one here, so I might have to start one.
Sweet. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. And a little bit of background about myself. I lead product for the Salesforce DX CLI. Prior to this, I was working with the core developer experience team at Salesforce, working on the CLI and the build experiences. Prior to that, I was working at PayPal, working closely and partnering with Vladimir on the developer console and developer productivity. A fun fact about myself, I've been spending a lot of time lately working on kindergarten projects and arts and crafts. I just realized we created 74 pieces of craft in the past 6 months, homeschooling my 5-year-old. So yeah, I guess I've found my alternate career here. Cool. Yeah, so in today's session, we will learn more about how companies like PayPal, Netflix, Lyft, and Spotify are looking at demystifying developer experience for internal engineering teams via portals and platforms. Let's get started. My first question is to all the panelists. We'll start with Vasant. So developer portals or platforms is quite an ambiguous term where everyone has their own understanding of what it is, what it should do. Everyone has a lot of interpretations and perspectives on it. So what, according to you, makes a developer portal or a platform, and how do you characterize it? Also, what is the goal or vision for the internal developer portal or platform, in this case at Netflix? You're on mute, Vasant.
Classic Zoom mistake. I'll start with your second question first, and then maybe try to answer my perspective on the larger question. At least at Netflix, what we are looking to create is we have decades of evolution in terms of developer tools, individual point tools for point sort of functionality. What has been missing is more a centralized front door in order to navigate and interwork between these different tools. So for us, what developer portals and platforms mean is almost like the front door, or consolidated front door into at least 2 to 3 dozen different individual platform tools and products, and like centralizing them, connecting them, and like cohesing the overall experience. With respect to the term in general, I do think that there are numerous interpretations. And I'm actually curious to learn from everyone else's perspective on what they see.
Cool. How about you, Daniel? Would you like to share your perspective on developer portals and platforms?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, we actually chatted with Netflix a bit, and of course, looked at all their blogs and whatnot. And I like to contrast Lyft with Netflix in that Netflix has a lot of existing tools that they're trying to bring together internally and make it easier for their teams to navigate the various tools that they have. Whereas at Lyft, we were kind of coming at it from an opposite angle, which is that we don't have too many homegrown tools that we're using. We're using a lot of other open source tools. We're using a lot of vendor tools. And we're trying to find a way now to achieve the same thing, which is to give people a front door for all those tools. And a place also where internally we can build tools that don't exist. A lot of infrastructure teams don't have experience with front ends. With building, web tools, there's a lot of CLIs that come and go at Lyft. So we wanted to really look at the abstractions and, the developer experience around building tools. That was a big focus for us, as we started on Clutch. Once we had kind of built the initial proof of concept and seen that, different teams at Lyft were interested in that kind of portal. But yeah, our portal is very much about like starting and looking at the life cycle of a service, right? You design and build a service, you create the repository, you launch the service, you operate the service, and eventually you decommission the service. So right now we're focusing very heavily on that kind of operation phase of the service. So if I get paged, okay, this is where I go to find the information and the tools that I need to remediate the action. So we're tracking MTTR, mean time to resolve, as part of our efforts. But the scope is constantly expanding. Many teams internally are interested again in building tools for their infrastructure. And yeah, we're looking at ways to encourage those contributions and allow people to build without over cluttering or building a very disconnected experience.
Great. Austin, how about the backstage efforts? What's your on development?
Thanks. I think for us, it's maybe slightly different than the front door analogy. I think for us, it was really all about speed. We wanted to take a step back and look at what are the core jobs to be done that a developer faces on a day-to-day basis, independent of what tools or technologies help them actually accomplish those goals, and really optimize an experience for those core jobs. And so we focus those around create, manage, and explore. And so for us, it's all about how can we provide a place where a developer candidly doesn't even need to care about the tools for 90% of what they want to accomplish, but rather they can come in and say, okay, I need to create something new. I need to understand or manage something that's existing, or I just need to explore the ecosystem at Spotify or beyond and really understand what tools or technologies or APIs or CLIs already exist for me to accomplish the job I want to accomplish. And then at the end of the day, there's definitely tools that are backing and integrating with a portal, and that certainly aligns with my view. But I think for us, it's really about shifting the prioritization from the tools and from the infrastructure, and really prioritizing developers and their ability to accomplish the specific jobs that they care about. And frankly, at least at Spotify, they tend to care less about the infrastructure and much more about realizing a feature or something for their end user.
Great. Vladimir, do you share similar views with Austin, or what's the take?
It is really interesting because ours is kind of a hybrid of ideas that we heard from Austin and Vasant and Daniel. Actually, our journey started with improving the velocity of development. by creating the system that allows developers to start a project, a sample code gets committed to GitHub, then you get the build, the test environment, and the whole pipeline all the way to promoting to production. And that was very successful for the Java applications and Node applications. And in our organization, we have about 150 different tools. And all of these tools are independently developed. So people invent their UIs, their CLIs, and they're all different. And you have to invent the ways to deal with security and logging and all of that. And as people had these desires, they were all coming to the team that developed this original tooling. And they became the bottleneck because everybody was coming to them and the team was very small. So the next generation of the tooling that we envisioned and started embraces the federated development model, where there is a centralized team that provides awesome UI and CLI and security. The whole plumbing is there, and individual builders can create their tools and plug them in. And one really interesting feature, which is a little bit different from Backstage, is that when you develop this, how we call them extensions, the team that developed the extension is responsible for owning it and running it. So they don't have to come to the centralized team for updates. They can even release these things completely independently for the whole tools from the base tools. And the great news, we were working on this for about 2 years, and it is now getting in the general availability to our 5,000 developers. Great interest among tool builders because we made it so easy for them and so attractive to come and join the ecosystem, use the wizards and tooling that help them to create the tooling that all gets surfaced, as Vasant mentioned, in this common door. So all the tools for the developers are going to be in one place.
Cool. It's nice that there are different perspectives around how we are perceiving developer portals and platforms. Having talked about the overall overview of how you're looking at it, Vasant, this is mostly to you. So we hear that Spotify and Lyft have open sourced their platforms. While you were doing this going through the phase of market research, what were your insights? I mean, did you look at other players in the market? So can you talk a little bit about what you learned from that experience and how you went about deciding on Backstage?
We definitely did not want to reinvent the wheel, and we did want to be deliberate about what we build on in-house and what we can just stand on the shoulders of giants on. So fun fact, I think we talked to Vladimir, we talked to Daniel, we talked to Austin and his team at Spotify. We did look at all of these options. At the end of the day, what it came down for us is there were like product positioning differences in all of these different options and where we were starting from that ultimately made the equation for what we could build off of. We also were pretty keen to have as much decoupling as possible between the front-end layers, the back-end layers, and other machinery that's involved in developer portals. And so we were looking for the options that gave us the least amount of coupling between each other, between the different layers.
Awesome. So did you look at any other players as well in the market while you were doing your market research? Any learnings from that you could share?
I do believe there's a ton of options in the industry, and new ones are coming up every day. In fact, just before this meetup, we were talking with a commercial vendor who's introducing their new product that solves this exact set of problems. They are also building for extensibility from day one. They also recognize that no single team can provide the most curated sort of experiences for the different personas. So definitely strong trends, numerous options on the table. I think the ultimate equation for everyone on the call, if you're considering something at your own workplace, the call might come down to what's like the closest sort of product market fit for your engineering needs, and what gives you sort of like the most freedom to evolve it as you go, depending on like the evolutionary trends at your company.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Daniel, would you share some of the key guiding principles for the platform that you're working on. For Clutch, when you started the journey, what were those key guiding principles?
Sure, absolutely. Well, and I wanted to jump back to your previous question real quick, which is looking at the product market fit. When we were looking at creating Clutch and open sourcing it, we did look around for other open source tools and other commercial vendors as well. And one of the key principles that we really needed was the ability to do a lot of customization and write our own code, if necessary in order to do that. So highly configurable platform is one thing, but also being able to extend it, having it be open source is important to us. Because when you look at a lot of the vendor tools that we use, like say the AWS console, it tries to do everything for everyone. And, there are certain things at Lyft, for example, that are just not safe to do, like deleting a cluster without first checking that it doesn't have traffic via the proxy is something that's not safe to do. Now, there's no way in the AWS console to add that, so you're we hit a dead end in a lot of areas where we would see time and time again the same kind of accidental mistakes or issues during outages or accidental outages when someone was trying to do something else, that we were like, we need a place where we can write code in order to solve some of these problems. And so, the security industry or that section of our industry has a lot of tools related to automating workflows for security remediation and ingesting information for reporting and those kinds of things. But none of them, we found really were flexible enough to do what we needed to do. So that was really the most important thing for us. And we knew of Backstage, but it wasn't open source when we started building our tool. We open sourced around the same time. And that's the joke at Lyft, is that anytime you go to open source or create a tool, as soon as you get to the point of finishing it or deploying it or open sourcing it, whatever, 10 more are going to come along at the exact same time. So you'll find, that a lot of companies are working on very similar things internally, externally. There's a new startup almost every day in this space. And developer UX is really a hot area right now, I think, for a lot of large engineering organizations. For
sure, definitely. Austin, is there any additional thoughts on that you'd like to add?
No, I think we totally agree in terms of like extensibility and also that I know Vladimir used the word federated. I mean, we even at Spotify, when we started Backstage and now internally, I think it's 86% at this point of the code that's been contributed to Backstage is not by the core team. It's by teams building plugins or extending the core. And now that's, of course, moved open source. But so for us, similarly, like extensibility and customization are absolutely vital. But again, our core principles were really all about speed and scale and sort of quelling the chaos that engineers were facing on a daily basis.
Awesome. So the general theme around developer portals, as I understand from this conversation, is there is some aspect of federating the development that lets all the platforms to scale and extend. So Vladimir, how do you approach federated development at PayPal with the console?
Excellent question. And that was actually our key requirements. We did the evaluation of a whole range of open source and commercial products. And there are some models that had these models of extensions, inspired by extensions and plugins that we have seen in Eclipse and then VS Code and similar. And one difference that was critically important for us is that the one who develops the extension would be able to deploy it and operate it entirely on their own without any involvement of the team that owns the tool, because we have such a variety of different tools that span, data engineering and machine learning and AI and so on. And they may have different needs for scaling. For example, the AI folks may run certain experiment and their tooling needs to run on a separate cluster and still nicely integrates with the core. So, and that is one of the curses, if you want, when you look into a variety of open source projects, you see so much promise in number of these systems, but they are just not there exactly to be the right match to what you need to do. So then there were a couple of interesting things that we have seen, new tools coming, particularly around the Kubernetes ecosystem that provides some things that made it easier. But at the time, it was really important for us that we can deploy on our existing infrastructure, which was not Kubernetes at the time. So that pushed some design choices. And the end result is that you have a large portfolio of these extensions that cover a very broad development ecosystem, not only for developers, but data engineers and other engineering groups in the company.
That's an interesting point where you just touched upon the personas. So before digging deep into the follow-up conversation, I'd like to pause here for a minute and turn it over to Ron to take some questions from the audience. We'd love to keep this interactive. So if you have any questions, you don't have to wait all the way till the end. We'll take a couple of breaks. So this is our first.
Yep.
Over to you, Ron.
Thanks, Pooja. So far, really interesting conversation. Loved it. Things are coming in from folks who have asked some questions. So I think Clint Parker is for Austin. Was it hard to initially catalog the systems and tools, and how long did that take?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'll answer the question in two ways. One, for Spotify, it did. We essentially said, oh, okay, well, here's some documentation and a nudging, and everyone will be good Samaritans and do it. And that just simply didn't happen, or at least was never going to get us to 100%. And so we actually ended up just automating that work of ingesting tools and existing components. And it got, I think, particularly challenging for us. I don't know if anyone else is in this situation, but we have like all of our mobile apps and things are in a monorepo. So figuring out the right way for those components and features to live alongside backend components and services and data pipelines and data sets definitely sort of necessitated bringing in experts in those areas and also automating that work. So from a Spotify perspective, it was definitely challenging, and sort of what we've realized is once we hit about 70%, everyone just started being and living in Backstage, and then sort of the incentives were aligned for the rest of the components to arrive there as well. And from just looking at and working with a number of open source adopters, we've built processors that people can use to essentially automate that ingestion, and that's a big place of development right now in the Backstage community. So huge problem and definitely a challenge that we've tried to solve within Spotify for sure, but I think to solve it across the industry and across the very different needs that the different component types have within different companies is something that really only an open source community can tackle collectively.
Perfect. Vasan, I know you have your hands up. Do you want to expand?
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon Austin's point. We are pretty early in the life cycle of populating our software catalog, but one big promise that we see is this is a great opportunity for us to sort of even clean up the catalog, introduce some data hygiene, put the right kind of metadata in while we are doing this one-time heavy lift. And then we are definitely counting on this just becoming a virtuous cycle and something that just organically happens over time.
Perfect. I think we have a few more questions here. And by the way, we did want to launch a quick poll to the audience. I'm going to launch it while we're asking the questions, really simultaneously here. And the question in the poll, before I go back to the question, is which interface do you prefer to work with for deploying your code? I see people are starting to come in, CLI, UI, they're kind of in competition with each other. But let me go back to the questions. A question from Nadav actually is, for everyone, did all of your apps fit neatly into the new IDP? If you left some out, what was your criteria? Whoever wants to grab it first, go ahead, unless I'll just drop it.
I have sort of my cheeky off the cuff answer is that if they weren't deployed in 30 days, we just sent people an Instagram on Slack and said, hey, you haven't redeployed the system in 30 days, you should probably throw it away. So that was one of the core criteria for us. Like if it hasn't been deployed candidly in the last day or two, then we should revisit it. But I'll bring back the other example I said earlier in a more grounded answer, which was really for us breaking apart mobile features, because really the goal was to give developers a view of what are the features that they own end to end. And so there might be a manifestation in mobile UI code that needs to live side by side with a set of data pipelines or data sets and backend services. And so providing an experience that put all these different complex component types side by side and showed their interaction and interdependency was definitely a challenge. And I think we hit that most in the mobile space, which may just be because of how we're architected there versus microservices and backend. But that was definitely a challenge that we faced, and that was something that followed on later.
That makes sense. Any other thoughts, Vladimir?
Yeah, I would like to add something. So sometimes you have the opposite problem. How do you get people to use this new platform? Because in the past, people have been developing everything on their own from scratch. And then the question is, when they have something, why should they move? So you need to show them the vision of the better future and actually how they could accelerate their development by having a nice UI library that you can use even with the mock designer. So the product manager can drag and drop the UI elements and they will get the React application, just a little bit of wiring and it will work. And also a very nice CLI experience based on the Open CLI framework, which enables all of these CLI experiences to be nested and integrated with each other. And you get a really continuity across all the tools through the one CLI. So when people see that, then they recognize this is going to speed up our work. And also people will be able to discover our tools because they will be in the developer portal, as opposed to developers having to know exactly where to go to use a particular tool. Then the question is, do you restrict certain applications? Let's say somebody creates a extension for weather forecast. Should that be a part of the developer experience tooling? So probably not. So right now we don't have this problem. Nobody created such extension. And usually people approach the team for a little bit of help and guidance. And we have a little bit of the white glove approach to enable easier onboarding. And the first applications were along the application lifecycle management. So making a smooth experience, somebody mentioned in questions for the golden paths. This is the most common for Java, for Node.js and similar. And then over time, people are able to modify this and expand it and create their own workflows. And that's the area that we are working on now, to add arbitrary workflow capability into the tooling. So it runs the steps. And I would just like to add one detail. This decoupling in our vision is so important. So every user functionality is actually deployed as Docker, and that enables teams to use different languages and tools to develop their extensions. As long as they agree on the same API, they are welcome participants in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Vladimir. So just real quick, last question from Karen Clark here. For someone just starting their journey to creating a platform for developers, what is your advice? What do you wish you knew before you got started? Let's give this one like a minute and a half, because I do want to give the mic back to Pooja. Daniel, Vasan, any thoughts from you? Picking on you since you haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, for someone just starting, it's to know your developers and know the development experience. You treat it as a customer just like anything else. So doing user research, understanding what are the big pain points. I mean, for us, we looked again at incidents, and what were the biggest problems that people were having during incidents. And that was a good jumping off point for us. But that may not be the most immediate need in your org. Maybe you're having a lot of trouble with documentation and trying to give people a way to easily document their services. So it's just about trying to understand what the user needs. And particularly as someone who's been around infrastructure a lot, at Lyft, it's easy to lose sight of that sometimes when you're just deep working on databases or something like that. So yeah, just knowing the user, doing a lot of like product management type work, and having good visibility into how the system is working. Are people actually using it and looking at those numbers?
Perfect. Vasan.
I'll quickly build off of Daniel's point. Again, we are still pretty early in our life cycle, but we did have 4 or 5 different directions to take in like the MVP lifecycle of this developer platform. Do we solve for discovery? Do we solve for workflows, common engineering workflows? Do we solve for application creation? Do we try to just do SDLC connectivity between different tools? So that was quite challenging to just figure out, and big plus one to doing your customer research. Go talk to your developers, see what the burning pain points are for your developers today, so that you start at the right place and create the stickiness and virtuous cycle.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that kind of wraps up this quick Q&A break. We'll be back after the next section, but Pooja, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks everyone for asking such awesome questions. Perfect segue into what we want to talk about in this section of the panel discussion: personas, technology choices, and advice to teams that want to build something like this. So Vladimir brought up an interesting point about personas just before we segued into the Q&A, which is how the console at PayPal is targeting not just a broad developer persona, but really looking at different personas from a developer standpoint, like, depending on the kind of functionality they develop, the target device they code for. For instance, we have mobile engineers, mobile app engineers, data engineers, either people working in traditional data applications or big data engineers. So what was your prioritization there? So when you started building this thing, did you go after a specific set of developers, or was it like, I'm going to handle everything? So what was your decision making there? How did you approach prioritizing?
So the first decision was, where do we get the most bang for the buck? And application lifecycle management was the dominant one. And that is supporting most of our developers who are writing web services. They need to have a very smooth, productive path from creating a service and going through the whole DevOps CI/CD pipeline. So that was number one. And then after that, there was a set of smaller individual tools that could demonstrate really quick wins, something that developers use daily, surface in the same area. And in dealing with these things, you want to cover 2 areas, particularly in the beginning. One is you want to have the extensions or functionality that supports the most developers, because this is where you prove the value. But you also want to prove that various small teams can develop their tools with very little friction, and then the whole ecosystem with the UI library, CLI, the security plugins and everything, it accelerates their work so much that they can truly focus on the business logic of their particular tooling, and the rest is handled by the framework. So a number of smaller wins in the organization is really important to promote the new idea and allow people to experience the elegance and power of both extending and using the system.
Awesome, thank you. I know Vasant also talked about prioritizing the use cases briefly. So Vasant, do you have any additional thoughts on how you went about, getting that MVP going? I understand you're still early on in the journey, but what was that first MVP like?
Yeah, maybe I can talk more specifically to the things that Vladimir described. We also did our user research. We also optimized for which persona gives us like the most bang for the buck. My way of putting it is like what population is having the most pain. And in our case, it turned out to be Netflix is somewhat polyglot, but Java tends to be like the 600-pound gorilla. So Java software engineers, and in particular Java microservice developers, tended to be the largest population, the population with the most complexity. Maybe the one nuance that I'll add is Netflix platform itself. And by platform, I mean all the infrastructure teams. They're kind of undergoing a transition towards being more product strategy driven. And they are collectively looking to raise the abstraction level. And so there's a lot of new innovation coming along. And so one of the reasons that we picked the Java software engineer is it almost creates like a base foundation. So as these new innovations come in, whether they be on CI/CD or observability or something on lifecycle management, they can layer onto this developer platform. So our goal is to create that foundation so that independently we can add these value-added features as and when they land, because we can't control their timing and they're going to evolve on their own pace. And so we kind of drop down to a sufficient level of lowest common denominator, if you will.
Awesome. So, Austin, switching gears a little bit here, do you want to share your perspective on the implementation, technology choices, some of the trade-offs that you had to look into as you were trying to design this platform?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that actually ties really well, candidly, to the persona conversation, because we really think about it as we have two really distinct personas, which is people who actually use Backstage, which can then be broken into other segments. But then we have creators and people basically building into Backstage. And so I think if you sort of pivot the conversation to how do you think about optimizing for that audience as almost a customer in sort of the other side of the marketplace, if that makes sense in an analogy. So for us, we sort of started the same way and followed similar principles, and we optimized for what people could really rapidly get up to speed with. And so in terms of technology choices, we looked at what were people already using and what could people then turn around and simply extend, and what were the things that had the technologies that had the best frameworks out there for other developers to build on and scaffold from. Because the fact of the matter is the majority of developers that were contributing to and extending Backstage were not UI developers. They were not web developers. And so that's what pushed us toward TypeScript. It was something where people could pick it up, they could look at it, they could understand it, and it had some of the safety that JavaScript doesn't. And so that was really the decision that we made. But honestly, now we've invested so much in making that plugin building experience so optimized that the hope is you have to do very, very little. From an actual developer perspective, when you're building a plugin, it's sort of like, if you can take an analogy from serverless, it's sort of like you don't really need to worry about the infrastructure that your plugin's running within. You don't really need to worry about how it's actually consumed within or integrated within the platform, but instead just think about sort of building your experience within this box, which I love somebody's comment earlier, where like people want the illusion of control and being able to see. So making sure that box is transparent if someone wants to modify those tools. But yeah, for us, the principles were, let's look at what our actual providers are using today and what will be the easiest thing for them to pick up. And that fundamentally drove our technology choices.
Oh, that's great to hear. Speaking of technology choices and having the different set of personas, Daniel, the question to you is, what does success look like for you? How do you measure success? Are there metrics you would share, or essentially anything around how you look at success for your platform?
Success for us is usage. And, I mean, that's an initial success criteria. Obviously, we want people to be using it and to like using it as well. So constantly looking at collecting more data, around NPS and, how people are actually engaging with the tool. So that's one way of kind of automating the collection. And then of course we're doing, customer interviews to try to understand, did we build the right tool for you? Success in terms of a platform, though, is that we won't be building tools ourselves in 6 to 8 months. So right now we're still trying to build out the core. We're still trying to get the right abstractions in place to where, yeah, someone can really realize that dream of I can create a new workflow or something in 20 to 30 minutes. And we've done that for our very core use case, which is these kind of step-by-step workflows. There's a tutorial in the Clutch docs, which, you write a protobuf, you generate some code, you implement the stubs. You can do that in about 30 minutes and have a complete feature end to end. But again, the scope is constantly changed. So now people want to build, tabular displays of information. So we're working on those kinds of features and just trying to figure out what are all the different components that our developers at Lyft might need in order to build tools. We kind of do that ourselves first and build a tool using that, and then we kind of promote that and say, okay, now you can come in security and build a tool using this tabular data component. And that our goal is to have that flywheel effect and to have yeah, as many teams at Lyft as possible, contributing, building, maintaining, operating tools within Clutch, and we kind of shepherd the core and give people assistance where they need it and build things that are missing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Vladimir, going back to you, you talked about how the two different sets of users for your platform are using it, right? So how is it being adopted? Like, are they liking it? So how is it being received by your engineers, both from an end user standpoint as well as a plugin provider standpoint?
Very good. And what you mentioned is really critically important. There are two personas that are all important for us. One is the end user. So they need to have a smooth experience. And the primary one that we have been addressing is, as I mentioned, this application lifecycle. This is where you have the most exposure. And that needs to be smooth because this is what most developers are using. So the team that developed our tooling, which is called Console, by the way, is responsible for developing this application lifecycle tooling around Java and the Node. But then the second aspect are the tool builders. And significant metrics for them is how much faster did they get to realize their tooling, So by providing UI frameworks and CLI frameworks and security and logging, all of this that is coming out of the box, full role-based access control that spans the CLI, UI, and API interactions, it is something that gives them the boost. So once they recognize the value of participating in this ecosystem, the reception is actually quite good because they can deliver their tooling faster. They don't need to worry about onboarding. The documentation is presented in the same place. The CLI fits into the common framework. So in organizations that think about adopting such tools, there are a couple of ways of introduction. One is when particularly in larger organizations, there is a mandate. You must switch to this new tool. And the other approach is more soft-handed, where you present the better future. And then when people see that, oh, this is going to be easier and faster, then you get kind of organic buy-in that is a better way. And you get more enthusiasm around adopting the tool. And then when people see their tooling being surfaced in this common developer portal, I think it is very motivating. And it also enables all the users to easily get to the tool and use it. There was a comment here in the chat. You must create the ability for people to extend the things. And this is really important in a framework like this. And I would add, for some critical things in the organization, you also want to have a governance. So for example, when you're thinking about the whole DevOps lifecycle that is nicely supported in the tool, you cannot skip, for example, security validation. That must be there. So there are parts that you want to keep really fixed and strictly regulated, particularly in a financial domain. And there are areas where you can give freedom to people to be really creative and explore different ways of working.
Cool. Before we get into talking about governance and balance between governance and freedom, let's pause for a second and take some questions from the audience. Over to you, Ron.
Again, thank you, everyone. So quickly going into the questions, we have a ton and they are very loaded. So starting from the top, and I'm hoping we can get to everyone. I do want to keep this to around 5 to 6 minutes. Jessica is asking, what's your take on what a PM brings to the team? Building the developer platform. And this kind of goes into, is a distinct role necessary? Is it too hard for a non-developer to get into the problems developer face? And there's a few more continuations of it, but I think that's the general gist. Like, what are your thoughts about PMs? And I won't take anything to heart. I'm a PM.
I guess I could jump in on that one because I am a PM. I'll actually take it a step further. I will say that we brought product in across all of our platform organizations, and I think that's been a huge turning point for us and invaluable. But I think actually even further than that, we also have user research, data science, marketing. We simply treat all of our platform tools as if we're an external organization, even though we're within Spotify, and hypothetically we can go bug people and ask them to use our tools. We really think that I guess to use Vladimir's word, like that soft-handed approach is incredibly valuable. And so we've not only invested in product, but also in insights function and marketing functions around our platform tools and around Backstage in particular. And that candidly, I wish we'd done earlier, the more cross-functional skills, because it's been just incredibly valuable to building a diverse and well-rounded team and a better product.
Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts around it?
I can quickly add, we definitely had a PM team that was bootstrapped towards a lot of different goals within platform engineering, and I think it's a tremendous asset to have. It certainly can be done by a non-PM as well. We do have EMs and ICs in Netflix, sort of wear that hat. But big plus one to having like a strategy to also create alignment within a number of these partner organizations. As Vladimir put it nicely, you need the tool builders to come to the table and like be aligned towards this vision. And so using product strategy as a way to do that is a big plus for me.
Cool. And by the way, just clarifying, Jessica, loaded as in just really long questions, but I love the questions, so no worries about that. Next from Tanner, what user feedback about your platform has stuck out as helpful, surprising, or affirming? Any thoughts on this subject? I mean, no thoughts, we can continue.
I'll just add something. A feedback from the tool builders. You see, without our tool and the frameworks, the libraries, developers of tools had way too many choices, and they would often struggle to find what is the right and most productive path. We kind of limit the solution space and tell them, here is the library of beautiful React components that you can use. Here is the nice CLI framework. Here is how you will call the security functionality. And the things that are not of primary interest for them are already solved by our framework and tooling. So they can focus really on business logic of their tooling. So that is one of the feedbacks that it really accelerates the speed of development of tooling. And then making it visible to everybody in the same space as Vasant mentioned, the front door to the system is also very valuable.
Awesome. Thank you, Vladimir. So I'm going to do the same thing. By the way, I did not share the poll results last time, but UI won by a very close lead to CLI to which interface do you prefer to work with for deploying your code. I will simultaneously launch another poll while we ask questions here. But the next question is from Jasmine Robinson asking, how have you integrated self-service, support, documentation, just-in-time learning, or any other knowledge solution to assist engineers on the integrated tools just as they need it?
I can give an answer here. This is a great question. Our goal is to, one of the goals of the developer platform in general, I think, is to minimize kind of the training required to get started on a tool. You know, at a lot of organizations, there's so much tribal knowledge around operating infrastructure. And it's easy to fall back on that and just let people, you know, get mentored when they join the team, or you know, just kind of learn for themselves how things work. But you know, UIs give us this nice ability to kind of like show the relationships between things and guide people. So you know, we actually have a mock-up of inbuilt documentation into every tool. You know, where you can kind of like bring out a panel from the side and see, you know, each field, what is the information about this, very detailed help text about everything. And you may not need that all the time, right? You may be familiar with the tool already or the domain already and be able to use the tool. But we definitely recognize that there are a lot of people that just don't have some of that tribal knowledge. And so we want to give them a place, integrated right into the tool, to provide users of the tool, you know, extensive documentation.
Perfect. Thank you. So quickly, I know there was a question that Vasan actually answered asynchronously. Thank you, Vasan. Next question, I'm gonna take the last one so we don't take up too much time, and then I can hand the mic back to Pooja. Do you have some key metrics that you use as indicators to see whether a feature is working or not? Example, cycle time. How do you attribute these metrics to the features built?
I can go. This is an incredibly hard and complex question, and I think when I have a good answer to this question, I don't know, I'll retire or something, because this is, I think it's endlessly hard to measure success. So, I mean, we look at a blend of metrics. We look at a blend of qualitative and quantitative metrics. So, from a quantitative perspective, we focus a lot on essentially the time to be productive. So we really key in on onboarding, and we have a few metrics that we look at in particular there. And again, both qualitative and quantitative in terms of not so much contributions, but people's ability to feel confident in contributing. We found is actually a great indicator of how their onboarding is going. We also focus on, in particular domains, things like, I mean, in a backend domain, maybe it's deployments as a proxy for the health of the infrastructure and the comfort with deploying often. But frankly, the biggest metrics that we look at are in the perceived effectiveness that developers have. So we have a quarterly survey that goes out to a quarter of developers every quarter. And essentially that's sort of what we look to as guides for what tools are particularly painful, what tools are having significant engagement, where are the challenges in our ecosystem. So we look at a whole blend of metrics, to be totally honest, and we key in on specific ones on different cadences when we notice challenges. But we definitely have not found a golden metric, and I think frankly that's because building products and writing software is not it's more an art than it is a science, I think, in a lot of ways. And so really understanding the effectiveness and being an artist is not something we found a great way to measure.
Awesome, thank you. So quickly wrapping up this question section. Again, sorry if I didn't reach all the questions. Please post them in the comments and we'll try to do it async as we go. Quickly wrapping up the poll. So the question was, do you have an internal developer portal? I think it was a split between some folks that have it and it's not great to the majority that no, but we would like to have one. So thank you for answering the poll. Pooja, back to you.
Thank you, Ron. Classic muting and unmuting challenge. Yeah, thank you for your questions. Just segueing back into the conversation, we talked a little bit about governance, and I wanted to understand what, in your view, is governance? Like, are we looking at it from a centralized standpoint or a decentralized view? Vasant, over to you. How do you govern today as you're building this ecosystem where more and more contributions are coming your way? Is there like a centralized governance approach that you're taking, like Vladimir shared just now before we segued into the Q&A?
I think our approach is going to rely quite a bit on, I think both Vladimir and Austin referred to it earlier. There's a lot of white gloving that we do in the initial stages where we build up a partnership with the provider team. And we go into the nitty-gritties of what is the right sort of contracts to set in place, what sort of best practices to build in, what the maintenance lifecycle is, and so on and so forth. From then on, we don't expect to have numerous ongoing and like rapidly evolving partnerships in terms of these providers. So we do expect that once we've built up some of that initial connective tissue and muscle on partnering together on the right contracts, we expect it to be a self-sustaining sort of ecosystem where we can more loosely bring that community together through various mechanisms and keep up the best practices and the governance, if you will. So that's the high-level approach that we're thinking about right now. We don't have any like automated approaches currently planned or in the works, but I'm curious to learn from more of the products that I've seen like a year or more of evolution to see how that is going.
Thanks for sharing that, Vasant. Going back to Austin, we talked about federated development. Governance is something that's very, very sensitive. For instance, there's a fine balance between what we call governance and the freedom that teams enjoy. So how are you going about embracing governance as you're building this platform for the teams at Spotify?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's interesting the question comes to me because my senses were probably on the far end of a spectrum. At Spotify, there's I mean, even as an example, like if you go to look at a random document in Google Docs, it's probably open, even if you have no idea, no reason being there. So I think that sort of shows the ethos of like we basically I think governance is very minimal if non-existent, and so for us. We tried to make the right path or make the recommended path the easiest thing to do, and that's really the extent of governance. With then the follow up that the plugin builders or somebody who's contributing to Backstage also holds the pager for that plugin. So we treat any contribution to Backstage as something like we use tiers for systems, whatever, different companies use different things. But for us, Backstage is absolutely mission critical and is up there with, building playlists and streaming music simply because you can't, it can't go down or nobody can do anything. So for us, we definitely try to give people the tools to make the safe and decisions that perhaps we recommend, which may not always be the right ones. But then we really empower them to also own it end to end. And so that's really where I guess our governance comes in, which is really they're building plugins, they're going to get feedback from customers and users of those plugins. And so it's up to them to update them, but then it's also up to them when things break, they're on call for those plugins, just like they're on call for personalization tools for driving Discover Weekly or anything else within the Spotify experience. So we treat it just like a customer tool.
You brought up a great point, Austin, around monitoring and how that responsibility lies in the ecosystem. So Daniel, over to you. So how do you ensure the platform and the partner ecosystem stays healthy and reliable? Is monitoring and observability a federated responsibility as well?
Yeah, it absolutely is. You have to attribute every plugin to a team, and then we basically divert alerts that are related to that plugin directly to that team. But we rely a lot on testing and quality before deploy, basically, to try and ensure that there won't be any problems. So everything throughout Clutch is typed. We have Go on the back end, and JavaScript on the front end, and using protobuf, it pretty strongly encourages you not to make breaking changes to your API, for example. So to evolve them in a way that you're not going to roll out a backwards incompatible change that during deploy half of the users will see it as broken or something. So we focus a lot on the initial quality and giving people the right testing tools. But of course, yeah, when things do go wrong in production, we want the teams that built the plugin to get the alert and be responsible for it.
Thank you for sharing that. I know, Vladimir, you talked a little bit about governance as well. So I want to understand what level of governance is at the service provider level versus the centralized portal level.
Yes, and before that, I would just add a little bit to what Daniel mentioned. Having this key principle that no extension to console can ever bring the console down. That is really fundamental. So no matter what kind of crazy plugin or what kind of mistakes they make, the whole thing still runs. And that partially led to this full decoupling of extenders running in their own space. Now, thinking about the rules of behavior and observability is everywhere. So we know exactly every click on the UI. We track every CLI command. And observability is really built in. It goes into centralized place where we see all the metrics and all the traces, and we can troubleshoot. So partly we encourage or provide for the right behaviors by the design of the framework, like security is built in, role-based access control is in, you cannot escape that. And then in addition to that, you have the governance that is focusing on what kind of plugins we build and how do we build them. And as Vasant mentioned, to a great extent, this is done through white glove approach today in close collaboration and guidance, help tool builders build the things in the right and productive way. Thinking about the governance, the current approach is that the tools team would have the governance function. So they make the creation of new tooling and extensions known and managed. So you can impose the right kinds of behaviors. You can also propagate the proper ways of using the tooling and the framework and participating in the correct way in the ecosystem.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I do want to make sure we have enough time for the breakout sessions as well. So one last question from my side to wrap this up. This is again for all the panelists. Let's start with Vasant. Are there any roadblocks that you hit along the road and some of the lessons learned you might want to share with all of us, Vasant?
Yeah, just to, again, we are pretty early in our life cycle, but even in that early life cycle, one big roadblock that we encountered was just maybe skepticism, like why do we need this? We already have XYZ tool here and something else over there. And the skepticism tended to come both from just the tool builders or platform providers, as well as like sometimes you hear it from customers. It was really important to kind of go into the heart of the matter and see where that feedback is coming from and analyze that and make the right call. For example, when we hear it from customers, digging in a little deeper usually reveals that this is someone tenured, they built up muscle memory, they're good. They're not really thinking about, hey, what does it mean if Netflix is gonna double in the next 2 years? If you're gonna bring in 1,000 other engineers on board, what does the equation look like for them? So they're not really thinking about that. So was really important for us to be able to tell apart the signal, the true signal that was there. Another roadblock that I won't call it a roadblock, but just something to keep in mind is this is truly a partnership play. Like the tool builders have to come together, especially if you're bootstrapping it from zero. I think there's a little bit of a heavy lift in the first year, so as to speak. So it's an important phase. I think it pays attention to really form those partnerships and alignments early so that you have a smooth runway as you keep going.
Thank you, Vasant. You brought up an important aspect around like the adoption again and the initial roadblocks. Vladimir, do you share similar views on that, or do you see any other challenges that you want to share with all of us?
Yes, I would actually like to refer to one question from Damian. How long did it take to create the guardrails to prevent plugins from stepping on core product or other plugins? Excellent question. And as we studied a variety of both open source and commercial systems in the beginning of our journey, we realized that this is going to be really important, because when you think about a system that supports about 5,000 developers, and imagine this thing goes down, then the production stops. And what Austin was mentioning, even though this is developer system, it requires the same care, love, and attention as the key product of your company that is serving all these millions of users. So that was really important. So from the very beginning, the very fundamental idea of our system is to have a full decoupling and complete isolation of the core product from these extensions and plugins, so they can never bring down the system. And that is by design. This is the first and most fundamental principle of the tool.
Thank you. Daniel, any war stories you would like to share with us and how you overcome those?
I was just gonna, Austin, I think, had something to.
Oh, I just figured out in my screen I'm next, so I was following the snake. You're welcome to go first, Dan.
Yeah, just in terms of roadblocks, when you're starting an effort like this, just to echo Vasant, and you're looking at a big pain point within the organization, inevitably there are other teams within the company working on it. I mean, this isn't true, obviously, if you're at a smaller company, but if you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of developers and you have 10 to 20% of that at least allocated to working on infrastructure, there are people trying to solve that problem in one way or another throughout the org. So yeah, figuring out who are the stakeholders, who has a vested interest in this, who's working on something or has tried something similar in the past. We've had many tools and efforts like this come and go. Why did those not succeed? What can we learn from them? And yeah, it came down to very much, having pluggability and extensibility, and not just ending up with, a ball of spaghetti that, eventually you just outgrow and can't maintain, and a developer leaves, and then the thing kind of just rots away. So you definitely want to build, for scale, or use an existing platform that has that in mind, that plugin model in mind. But yeah, figure out what other teams, may already be doing something in that area, and get alignment.
Thanks, Daniel. Austin, would you like to share some of the lessons learned in your
Sure.
journey?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's only 6:13 on the West Coast. So you all can listen to me for hours with all the things we've messed up along the way. I would say the one thing that I think is maybe counterintuitive, so I'll raise it, is I think we focus so much on the extensibility and like plugins, and developers being able to build plugins, and developers being able to optimize their experience, and really focusing on the engineers and what they were trying to do. And I think there was a time when we lost a little bit of opinionation at all as we were building the platform. And I think it's a really important balance to think about, where you can create so much extensibility and lack so much opinionation in what you build that it can actually become overwhelming to build a plugin, and really, like, you're sort of not operating within any confines or guardrails, not even just from a don't bring the system down perspective, but from a design perspective. Like, hey, just give me some opinionated libraries I can build from a design perspective, and I'll be able to move quicker, and I'll be able to contribute more, and sort of the barrier to doing so will be much lower. So I think that's the one sort of counter thing I would share on this dimension is it's also really important to think about where are maybe the weaknesses in, or the things that really developers aren't incentivized to do, right? They're not incentivized to optimize the design as a backend engineer who's focused on distributed tracing, right? Like that's not what they're thinking about all day. So how can you give them tools, give them some opinionation or frameworks to work within that can be extendable themselves, but they just lower that barrier. So I think that's sort of the thematic roadblock area that was probably, I don't know, 6 months to a year, where we were just too extensible and lacked some opinionation. And so now we've tried to bring that back in much more in the last year or 18 months, especially since open sourcing and sort of having that expand across hundreds of companies.
Thank you so much for sharing that. With that, we kind of come to an end of our panel discussion. It has been a very insightful discussion on how the developer portals are truly characterized by automation, means to reduce friction, building up a developer community, and also sourcing all the information and functionality that developers need in one place. And this is what our panelists are having to say about their experiences building portals. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for being with us today and sharing their views on how developer portals and platforms are solving the diverse needs of developers, especially within the internal engineering teams. With that, I would also like to thank all of you and turn it over to Ron to take some questions. And I know we are running out of time, so over to you, Ron. Thank you so much.